There's no reservation under your name, ma'am. The words landed like a velvet slap. Naomi Blake stood tall, her deep brown eyes unblinking, hand tightening gently around her purse strap. In front of her, the blonde receptionist, name tag reading Chloe, flipped through the leather-bound reservation book for the third time, as if a miracle might appear if she just tried hard enough. But no miracle came. Table 3, the one overlooking the wisteria garden bathed in golden afternoon light, had already been given away. To someone more fitting. Comment 1 if you've ever been turned away. Not for any real reason, but because you didn't look like what they wanted. Lux wasn't just a restaurant. It was a statement. Located on the corner of Westgate Avenue, where each glass of wine could cover a semester's tuition, Lux was for the chosen. Glass walls reflected the sunset like the proud face of a god. Chandelier clusters, custom designed for each season, hung from the vaulted ceiling. Here, menus didn't list prices, only symbols. A pearl for dishes deemed worthy, gold for dishes that required status to touch. Naomi had arrived on time, at the right place, exactly as promised by her husband, the one who made the reservation. But still wrong in the eyes of the gatekeepers of this culture. Naomi Blake was a professor of moral philosophy at Crestfield University, and the only Black woman to ever hold a leadership seat in its faculty board. She didn't wear a Rolex, didn't carry a Chanel bag, just a simple white silk dress, neat, elegant. Her hair pulled back in a low bun, the curls smoothed with care, not to please others, but to honor herself. She didn't need credentials to sit at the table, she had them. But here it was clear, degrees meant far less than appearance. And Naomi, in their eyes, was a dissonant note in a symphony arranged for the old class. "We can seat you by the kitchen," Chloe offered, her tone soft but sharp enough to cut. "Table 3 has been reassigned to one of our regulars, Miss Elise Covington." Naomi's lips curled. Elise, white, blonde, once sat on the same diversity board with her, was now seated at the very table Naomi's husband had booked. "My husband, Mason Blake, confirmed the reservation. He has the code." "We don't have that code in our system," Chloe replied, stepping back as if her part was done. Naomi didn't argue. She didn't need to raise her voice to be seen. But every breath, every glance around her, from guests, from staff, whispered the same thing. "You don't belong here." Naomi pulled out her phone, opened the email. The reservation was clear. Table 3, Naomi Blake, 3 p.m. She held it up to Chloe. Chloe glanced at it, then turned away, whispering something to someone off to the side without offering any explanation. Naomi checked the time, 3:14. Elise was already sitting at her table, lifting her glass, laughing like the world was working exactly as it should. Naomi stood still, not from lack of options, but because this was no longer about a table. This was a test of the system. She had once taught about the soft power of social exclusion. Today, it was playing out in real time, and she was the evidence. A man in a tailored suit approached, hair slicked back, name tag. Preston Hale, executive manager. "We apologize for the inconvenience," he said, voice smooth as aged wine. "That table was reserved for a regular. I'm afraid it's out of our hands." "What about the confirmation code?" Naomi asked. "Must be a system error," he shrugged. "In any case, we'd be happy to seat you near the kitchen. It's quiet, private." Naomi chuckled, not from amusement, but familiarity. What could be more private than a place the whole system decided I don't belong in? And then the sound of a car, a quiet whoosh, smooth, like a warning. Through the glass doors, a black Tesla rolled to a stop. She didn't need to turn around. She already knew who had arrived. The game was about to change. Naomi didn't move. She stood tall, eyes locked on the light reflecting off table 3. She knew Mason wouldn't come in loud, but his presence always shifted the ground. She remembered what he once told her. "I don't invest in spaces. I invest in experiences, but if the experience excludes you, I'll buy the whole damn system." From behind, the sound of leather shoes, deliberate, unrushed. She didn't turn around. She just said, soft enough to slice the air, "They said I wasn't on the list." Mason Blake entered like a blade unsheathed at the exact moment. No yelling, no spectacle, just one look, and the entire room stopped breathing. Light from the chandeliers cut down across his shoulders, reshaping the air around him. He looked at Naomi, then turned to Preston, and said just one thing. "You're asking my wife to leave a place I built? You're asking my wife to leave?" The voice rang out, steel wrapped in silk. Naomi didn't have to turn. Mason Blake had arrived. She could feel the silence ripple, music halting, silverware suspended midair, all eyes turning toward the door. She inhaled softly, arms still held calmly across her chest, gaze still fixed on table 3, where another woman was still laughing. Comment 1 if you've ever wished someone would stand up for you, just when they were about to erase you. Lux, at that moment, was no longer a place to dine or flaunt status. It became a stage no one saw coming. Chandelier light cast soft reflections across Mason's charcoal suit, tailored with surgical precision. He didn't walk in like a boss. He walked in like a verdict. No servers greeted him. No whispers dared to survive. Because some people don't need introductions. Their presence is the answer. Mason Blake, 42, CEO of Azimuth Holdings, quiet owner of 58% of Lux's equity through 3 separate trusts. The media didn't know. The investment world could only speculate. Only those who truly understood power knew who he was. He didn't buy brands. He bought the systems that made them. And the reason he never interfered with Lux's operations was because he was watching how people act when they think power isn't in the room. Mason walked straight to Naomi. He didn't acknowledge anyone else. He placed a hand gently on her shoulder. Not affection, but affirmation. "I'm here." Naomi looked up, said nothing, just nodded toward the front desk. "Chloe said there's no reservation, and they gave our table away," she said, voice steady. Mason turned, his eyes cold as fired steel. "Preston Hale," he called out. The manager froze, like a man caught mid-lie. "You gave my wife's table to someone else?" "Mr. Blake, we didn't realize she was my wife?" Mason interrupted slowly. "Or didn't realize she was worthy." Preston swallowed hard, scanning the room for support. There was none. "That table was held for VIPs. Miss Covington is a frequent—" "And Naomi?" Mason asked. "She's not a VIP." No one answered. Elise Covington, still sitting at table 3, lost her practiced smile. She raised her wineglass, but her hand trembled. Naomi didn't even glance her way. Didn't have to. "And after denying her the table," Mason continued, "you offered to seat her by the kitchen?" Preston stammered. Chloe stared down at her clenched hands. "You didn't need to know Naomi was my wife," Mason said, his eyes sharp as a saw blade. "You only needed to know she's a human being. And you forgot that." Mason stepped forward. The entire restaurant fell into stillness. "I don't need more discussion. I need action." He pulled out his phone, opened an internal management app. A few taps. The reservation log appeared. "This is the confirmation for table 3, he said, holding up the screen. 3 p.m., Naomi Blake. "And this," he tapped again, "is the system log showing someone changed the reservation at 2:48 p.m., swapping the name to Elise Covington." Elise dropped her wineglass. The crash landed like a cue from a script. Preston began to mumble something, an apology, an excuse. Mason raised a hand. "It wasn't the receptionist. It wasn't the system. It was you." He stared straight into Preston, seeing through the layers of evasion. "And from this moment forward, I'm not speaking to you as a shareholder anymore." He turned slightly toward Naomi. "I'm speaking as a husband, a man who helped build this space with one hope in mind, that someone like her would never have to prove her worth." No one moved, no one chewed, no one dared to breathe. Mason turned to Naomi, extended his hand. Let's go sit, where you were always meant to. Naomi nodded. No smile, no tears, just walked. They passed Elise, now frozen like a wax figure beneath the sharp gold light. No words were spoken, but every gaze in the restaurant had shifted. No longer judgment, but a silent lesson in timing. Mason looked back once more, eyes landing on Preston, still frozen. Prepare for the executive board meeting, 7:30 p.m. tonight, and don't even think about deleting the log. If she hadn't been my wife, would her reservation have magically reappeared? Mason didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. The question sliced through the air, soft but sharp. Preston Hale stood frozen, his face drained of color. It was a simple question, but everyone in that room understood. This wasn't about a table. It was about the system. Comment 1 if you've ever seen politeness used as a mask to legitimize discrimination. An emergency meeting room on the second floor of Lux, normally reserved for investor briefings, had now become a courtroom for corporate culture. An ebony conference table, subtle lighting, a large screen on the wall. Kenya Cross, Mason's executive assistant, was already there, laptop open, files queued. No champagne, no finger food, just the truth, and a countdown to the official board meeting at 7:30 p.m. Kenya Cross, 35, brown skin, rimless glasses, black blazer. She was the mind behind most of Mason's strategic acquisitions over the past 6 years. Smart, sharp, fiercely loyal to transparency. She didn't speak much, but no system report went unchecked by her eyes. It was Kenya who received the reservation log edit from the internal server and forwarded it to Mason 5 minutes after Naomi was denied. Preston, Mason said calmly, are you aware only senior managers can override a VIP table assignment? It wasn't my fault, Preston began. Kenya projected the file to the screen. The reservation system interface lit up, crystal clear. Table 3, Naomi Blake, confirmed at 1:07 p.m., edited at 2:48 p.m., changed to Elise Covington by user ID, Hale P. Still think it wasn't you? Kenya asked, eyes locked on the screen. Preston said nothing. Naomi, seated next to Mason, remained silent, but her gaze was sharp as cut glass. This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was evidence. Mason rotated the laptop screen toward Preston. We traced the entire edit log over the last 6 months. Kenya advanced the slide. Data filled the screen. 17 cases of Black customers having their reservations altered or canceled. 12 of those tables were reassigned to white guests with no prior bookings. 100% of the edits were made under Preston's account. No one in the room moved. Mason stood up, scrolling through a list on his phone. 2 of those guests were doctors. One was a lawyer, one a nationally known journalist. He paused. I wonder if Naomi hadn't been my wife, would she have been number 18? You think I wasn't paying attention just because I rarely show up? Mason stepped toward the glass board, eyes on the fading sunset outside. The truth is, I let you run Lux freely because I wanted to see, when no one's watching, who does the system decide is human? He turned back, his gaze cutting into Preston like a blade. And today you erased a name, not because the system required it, but because the bias in your mind commanded it. Preston trembled. This isn't a mistake, Preston. This is your unofficial policy. Naomi stood. Her voice was low, but edged with steel. You know what's the most exhausting part? It's not working hard to be accepted. It's having to fight for what I've already earned, over and over again. Every eye in the room turned toward her. No one dared interrupt. And I'm tired of the quiet kind of discrimination. Dressed up in suits, smiles, and apologies, nobody really means. Mason placed a hand on her shoulder. We don't need apologies. We need change. Then turned to Kenya. Prepare the documentation. Call for a board meeting. Subject, Review of Ethical Misconduct. Preston Hale. As Naomi and Mason exited the room, Kenya stepped forward and gently laid a single sheet on the table in front of Preston. A printed log from the system. Final note from the front desk. Guest Naomi Blake was present. Was told no record found. Escorted to standby. Below it, a messy scrawl in pen. You weren't the first. Preston looked up, face pale. The door clicked shut behind Mason and Naomi. Outside, the restaurant lights had come on, but inside, the system had just been spotlighted, and darkness had nowhere left to hide. Clause 12. Gross misconduct. You're terminated. No one in the boardroom thought Mason would say it, at least not that loud, but he didn't just say it. He declared it. The way a judge delivers a verdict, unshaken, non-negotiable. Preston Hale stood frozen, his hand gripping a leather folder he never even opened. Comment 1 if you believe that sometimes the truth doesn't need permission to be heard. Lux Executive Boardroom, 7:32 p.m. Half the chandelier lights dimmed, casting a cold, sharp glow. 10 high-backed leather chairs surrounded a gleaming obsidian table. At one end sat Mason, hand resting on the corporate charter. Across from him, 6 board members, seasoned, powerful, experienced. But tonight they weren't seated as superiors. Tonight they sat like reluctant witnesses, awaiting a formal reckoning. Board chair, Alaric Jennings, silver hair, ash-gray suit, eyes like a folded blade. Newest member, Sienna Joe, head of digital strategy, and the first to speak after the media blow-up earlier that afternoon. Each of them held equity, but none of them held control like Mason did. And they knew, when Mason invoked Clause 12, this wasn't a discussion. This was judgment. Do we really need to escalate this far? Alaric began. Gareth, sorry, Preston, has been here since day 1. Yes, Mason nodded. Which is exactly why I have to ask, since when did loyalty become a shield for systemic bias? No one responded. Sienna glanced at Preston. The data's clear, she said, but how do we prove intent? Kenya, standing behind Mason, tapped the remote. The screen lit up with analytics. 17 edits, 12 matching covert racial bias patterns. She said plainly, intent is in the pattern, and this pattern is prejudice. Mason stood and slowly placed color-printed reports in front of each board member, reservation logs, internal employee emails, customer complaints. It wasn't just Naomi. This system has been operating smoothly for 6 months without a single question from any of you. Sienna frowned. We didn't know. And that's the problem, Mason cut in. Because you didn't know, you assumed you were innocent, but your silence was the shade that sheltered the wrong. He turned to Preston. And you, Preston, you didn't just mess up. You turned wrongdoing into routine. Preston snapped. I kept this place tight, upscale. I knew how to choose guests that brought respect to this space. Mason didn't move. He simply replied, You think upscale means reserving table 3 for someone like Elise Covington? He placed the pen down on the termination document. Then let me teach you what real power looks like. He pulled out another sheet, motioned to terminate under Clause 12, gross misconduct, ethical violation. You're not being fired over a mouse click. You're being fired because you chose to protect appearances, instead of people. Preston stood like a man nailed in place. No one defended him. No one interrupted Mason. Even Alaric, the one who once backed Preston, looked away. Sienna nodded slowly. It's necessary. Mason didn't smile. He simply motioned to Kenya. HR will handle the process. You have 24 hours to turn everything over, and I strongly advise you, don't try to take anything out of the system. Preston clutched his folder and walked out. He didn't say a word, and with every step, it was as if the weight of a once polished power was now dragging behind him, lifeless. The boardroom door shut. Mason turned back to the board. We're not fixing an incident. We're rebuilding a standard. Alaric nodded. What do you need from us? Commitment to transparency, a new anti-bias policy, and a full release of our internal protocols to the public. No glossy newsletters, no media spin, just the truth. Sienna nodded. I'll rewrite the ethics code tonight. Mason sat down, eyes fixed on the blinking LED panel in the corner. Lux was no longer just a restaurant, it was a symbol. And from this day forward, that symbol would be named, "We Seat with Justice." Are we finally safe to speak? The question echoed from the back of the employee meeting room, more like a sob held in too long than a demand. It wasn't loud, it wasn't angry, it was a whisper. But the weight of it silenced the entire room. The voice belonged to Terrence Wynn, 26 years old, server, who'd been denied promotion 3 times, without a single explanation. Comment 1 if you've ever stayed silent, afraid that speaking up would push you out, just because you were different. The staff hall at Lux, used for skills training and brand culture briefings. Tonight, it was something else entirely. Tonight, it was a space for truth. Mason sat in the center of the circular room. No podium, no titles. Naomi stood behind him. She didn't speak, but her presence alone was testimony. Around them sat over 30 staff members, servers, chefs, receptionists, housekeeping, the people who'd upheld the so-called standard of excellence. But tonight, they weren't here to listen. They were here to be heard. Terrence Wynn, tall, lean, black, sharp eyes, soft voice, was the first to speak, praised often by customers for his professionalism, yet never assigned lunch shifts, because his appearance didn't fit the VIP hour. He once applied for a supervisor position, only to see his file left untouched on a desk. And he had stood in the lobby that day, watching Naomi be turned away, but couldn't bring himself to step forward. After Terrence, the air grew tight, like a violin string stretched to its edge. Then another voice. Maya, a brown-skinned receptionist, spoke. They told me to tie my curls back, because natural hair made guests uncomfortable. A dry chuckle escaped. No one laughed with her. I raised concern 3 times about being scheduled late shifts after I declined to attend a manager's party, and all 3 times I got reassigned as a backup receptionist. This was no longer just about Naomi. The truth was spreading, cracking, overflowing like a glass tipped too far. No one shouted, but each word sliced through the polished surface of Lux's image, like a knife. Mason stood, not to interrupt, but to step back. None of you need to apologize for your silence, he said, but from today on, you no longer have to fear. He turned to Terrence. Do you still want to be a supervisor? Terrence lifted his head. I do. Mason nodded. Then, as of this moment, you are Lux's new director of guest experience, effective immediately. The room erupted, not with celebration, but with the sound of justice, arriving in real time. Maya covered her mouth. Tears pushed past her control. A kitchen staff member of East Asian descent spoke, voice trembling. I used to think silence was the safest choice, but maybe silence is also a kind of complicity. Mason nodded. We can't rewrite the past, but we can change the structure the past created. He raised a hand toward the screen. A reform roadmap appeared, divided into 3 parts. AI tools to detect bias and reservations, and scheduling anonymous internal reporting system independent ethics advisory board. Naomi stepped forward. The issue isn't just who got excluded, it's how many saw it happen and thought they couldn't do anything. Terrence looked at her. Maya looked at her. Tonight, Naomi said, we don't speak to claim power. We speak to reclaim the space that was taken. Mason turned to Kenya and gestured. Print the new policy. We'll post it in HR in the staff cafeteria on the bulletin board. Anywhere someone has ever felt small. The wall clock ticked once, just a soft click, but it was the sound of a machine being rewound for the first time. As the room cleared, a young Indian server, Ravi, walked up and quietly placed a folded paper on Naomi's table. She opened it. Scrawled handwriting read, "You weren't the first." Naomi looked to Mason. He nodded. "And if we do this right," he said, "she'll be the last." Naomi folded the note, slipped it into her jacket pocket. Because now, the truth wasn't just being told. It was printed, posted, and signed, with action. It wasn't just a table, it was a mirror. Naomi said those words on camera. A final line for a national investigative news feature. But it wasn't the words that stopped millions in their tracks. It was what followed. Silence. A heavy, compressed quiet, as if the entire country had looked into a mirror for the first time, and couldn't look away. Comment 1 if you believe that even the smallest actions can expose an entire cultural system. 2 weeks after Preston's termination, Naomi's story, being erased from Lux's VIP list, went nationwide. The hashtag #Table for Justice exploded across TikTok, Twitter, Instagram. Videos poured in from Black voices, sharing stories of being removed from the table, literally and metaphorically. It was no longer about Lux. This had become a cultural trial, a reckoning between those who decided who got to sit and those who had grown used to standing on the sidelines. Joining the movement was Dr. Patrice Allen, a university professor once rescheduled out of a panel she was invited to, and Micah Rowe, a rising actor who'd been reassigned seats at a film premiere because his name wasn't on the list, despite holding an invite. Both appeared on Naomi's newly launched show, The People's Table, a digital talk series where voices of exclusion were shared without filters, without edits, without interruption. And for the first time, people actually listened. The debut episode of The People's Table hit 4 million views in just 48 hours. But success brought pushback. Lux received anonymous threats. Other luxury venues launched whitewashed PR, posting photos of diverse staff and inclusive dinner parties, yet refusing to comment on the issue. One of Mason's major investors even pulled out of a deal, accusing him of politicizing the brand. The pressure grew. Naomi looked at Mason and asked, "Do we keep going?" Mason didn't hesitate. "We haven't even started fighting yet. We've only just cleared the table." Naomi hosted a special live stream. No guests, no music, no sponsors, just her, looking into the lens. "I don't need an apology from the system that erased me. I need it to stop erasing anyone else." She announced a bold initiative, the Seat Equity Initiative, a coalition of businesses, restaurants, training centers, and civil rights attorneys. The mission: nationwide retraining for front-of-house staff AI tools to detect bias in reservations and shift assignments. A national hotline for those denied access without cause, not to destroy, but to rebuild. From the roots. In week 3 after the live stream, one video went viral. A 12-year-old black boy, dressed neatly, was told to wait outside during a family dinner at an upscale restaurant. He turned to the camera and asked, "If I wore a tuxedo, would I be allowed to sit with you?" The video hit 18 million views in a single night. And below it, thousands of comments mentioned Naomi, Mason, The People's Table. For the first time, the reaction wasn't just personal outrage. It became structural, organized, a call to reclaim the seats taken over generations. Micah, Patrice, Terrence, along with dozens of others who had spoken up, organized an outdoor event titled Table Reclaimed. In a Central City park, 20 long tables were set up. No VIP names, no reservations. Anyone who showed up got a seat. Naomi sat at the center. Beside her, an 8-year-old black girl, Maya's daughter, drew a picture of a long table filled with people of every shade. Mason arrived late. He handed Naomi a glass. "This is the vintage bottle Preston used to reserve, only for guests he called worthy." Naomi smiled, "Then pour it for everyone." Final shot, a wide aerial view. 20 white tables in the park. Hundreds of people gathered, laughing, sharing, no stage, no scripts. Naomi stood with a mic and said, "Thank you for sitting with us today. But don't just sit. Ask yourself, who's still out there, still waiting to be invited?" Mason looked at her. The little girl beside them waved up at the drone. On her t-shirt, in bold print, it read, "We don't ask to be invited. We bring our own chairs. We didn't just build a table, we built a future where no one eats alone." Naomi said it at the grand opening of the Table of Voices Community Center. She wasn't standing alone. To her left stood Terrence, now Director of Multicultural Training at Lux. To her right, Maya and her daughter, the young girl holding a paper model of a dinner table made from recycled scraps. Comment 1 if you believe some tables aren't built from wood, but from courage and human connection. An abandoned building in Westgate, once a commercial bank, had been transformed into Table of Voices, a multifunctional community hub, funded and designed by Naomi, Mason, and the team behind Janshi Table for Justice. It wasn't a symbol. It was action, skills workshops, a podcast studio, a multicultural kitchen serving all backgrounds. Every space was created by people who once had no seat. Today, the doors opened for the first time. Present at the event were the witness chairs, each person representing a chapter of the movement. Ravi, former busboy, now head of center operations. Dr. Patrice Allen, founder of the online course Recognize the Bias. Micah Rowe, actor-activist funding the open seat scholarship for Black students Kenya Cross. Mason's right hand, who stayed behind the scenes but quietly processed every legal reform that forced the system to change from within. Midway through the launch, Naomi received an urgent email from legal. A group of former investors was filing an objection against the trademark The People's Table, calling it divisive and inappropriate branding. Naomi stared at the line, her hand clenched. "Are we starting from scratch again?" Mason stepped up, placed a hand on her shoulder. "Number this time, we're not asking for permission." And for the first time, Naomi didn't respond with logic. She responded with action. On the main stage, Naomi made it official. Starting today, the People's Table isn't just a talk show, it's a nationwide coalition. Behind her, the screen lit up, a U.S. map glowing with partnership sites, restaurants, schools, local communities. She continued, "We don't wait for laws, we write laws from the heart. There's no profit greater than making someone feel like they belong." The entire room rose to their feet, no cue. They just felt part of the promise. That evening, Naomi hosted one final live stream from the new center. She read a letter, a handwritten apology from Preston sent to each former employee of Lex. He wrote, "I protected the wrong things. I thought I was preserving elegance, but I was only shielding my ignorance." Naomi folded the letter. An apology can't erase the past, but if it opens the door for others to walk through, then I'm willing to leave it right here, beside this new table. She placed the letter next to the paper model the little girl had brought. 1 month later, Table of Voices received approval to open its first satellite branch out of state. Lux became the first business to receive the Fair Seat rating, a new standard of service equity created by the very communities once denied it. Naomi didn't accept awards, didn't pose for magazine covers. She chose to visit schools, especially the ones where Black kids had once been excluded from events due to dress code violations. She told the students, "They may not set the table for you, but if you know how to build the table, pour the water, listen to every voice, they won't be able to stop you from sitting." The video fades to black. Only Naomi's voice remains. "We no longer ask, 'Where's my seat?' We ask, 'Who else hasn't been seated yet?'" Then a list scrolls, hundreds of anonymous names submitted to the center through the number Their Seat To campaign. The final title fades in. This is not the end of a story. It's the beginning of a standard. And in the lower corner, a single line. We didn't reclaim the table. We redefined who belongs at it. In a world where many have to fight for even an inch of space to be heard, Naomi never asked for a seat just for herself. She built a table for everyone. Her story isn't just about a single moment of humiliation at a restaurant. It's about a system that learned how to write its name on the list and erase others like they never existed. This isn't a fairy tale. Naomi had no superpowers, no magic wand, only resolve. What made her unforgettable wasn't that she resisted being erased. It's that she stood up, not to fight back, but to rebuild. To those who've ever been overlooked, felt too much or not enough, or been told they didn't fit the brand, this story is for you. Because the right to exist, to be respected, isn't a privilege, it's the foundation of dignity. You may not change the whole system today, but you can do what Naomi did. Hold your ground, face injustice, and dare to be the first to speak. Because sometimes change doesn't begin with the loudest voice, but with the first one that doesn't bow. If this story touched you, comment one to help us share the table where everyone belongs.